right away. Eunice Musime from Akina Mama wa Africa, 16 days of activism. You've been doing it since 1991. Do you feel you've made progress in addressing gender-based violence?
Thank you, Sandra, and good morning to our viewers. Yes, as the women's movement globally, but also in Uganda, we celebrate the gains. We celebrate the fact that we've been able to create awareness. There's now more awareness about sexual and gender-based violence, more awareness about violence against women, because we distinguish the two. We recognize that women and girls are disproportionately affected by violence. We have also seen progress in terms of laws and policies that have come in place. Right now, the Parliament of Uganda is debating the Sexual Offences Bill, and that too has the potential to become a progressive law to address violence and harassment, especially in the world of work. Because this year, we are focusing on violence and harassment in the world of work, but with a specific focus on informal sector workers. We know that 84% of women work in the informal sector. So in the markets, in the agricultural sector, so the kind of workplaces that are precarious, they do not have contracts. The fact that I do not have a contract, and think about domestic workers, they don't have contracts. So if their boss decides to harass them and the worker says no, she has no contract, the boss will just say, so she will just leave. The boss will say leave because you're not, unlike here, in this formal place, you have a contract and your boss can't wake up and tell you to leave. But that doesn't mean that you will also not be harassed. But this year we are just focusing on those that are more vulnerable, so informal sector workers.
All right. Well, for you who's watching us this morning and you're just joining the conversation, the purpose of these days that run every year from the 25th of November to the 10th of December is to highlight the pervasiveness of sexual violence, while, of course, pushing for collective solidarity to end the violence. This year's theme is Orange the World: Fund, Respond, Prevent, and also Collect. Eunice, at what point do I say I've been harassed? Sexually harassed? At what point do I say that?
At the point where you feel that the behavior is unacceptable, there's an issue of consent. And it's a thin line. It can be a thin line, but there's generally unacceptable behavior that is harassment or violence. So it's a whole continuum of jokes, sexist jokes. So that are made. It can be practices, catcalling. When you go down to the markets, many women don't want to go there right now because, the men are just simply catcalling you. And it does not matter what you're dressed in, whatever, even if you're dressed in a gomesi or a hijab, whichever. There's, of course, physical violence.
Catcalling, someone saying, "Eh, baby, sexy."
Yeah, sexy.
That is sexual harassment.
Yes.
Saizi yange.
Saizi yange. That is sexual harassment. Yes.
And in the workspace, be it in the formal or informal sector, take us through the different ways in which sexual harassment, you've mentioned of sexy or catcalling and all, but for a formal sector, digging deeper in the different ways that it manifests, please take us through the different ways, because someone watching us this morning may not know that they're actually being sexually harassed.
So we define sexual harassment as those behaviors that cause trauma, cause stress, are unacceptable. I've found that most times when people are harassing others, they know that they are harassing them. Sometimes it can be a thin line of it's a blooming love relationship, but men know when the woman does not want to be in their line of attention. Yes. What I would like us to discuss, though, is the issue of unequal power relations. So in the workplace, if you are a supervisor, if you are my boss, and you are making sexist jokes, you are saying, making offers, let's go out, let's have a drink, it's probably, I'm probably going to accept that because you are my boss, you're my supervisor, you have the power. So that introduces the issue of knowing whether, and even if I acquiesce, even if I say yes to the drink, to certain things, you as the supervisor has the power to know that it's unacceptable. Yeah.
And what is the impact on when someone goes through that, you know, sexual harassment incidences and the like, what is the general impact that it may have on them, be it mentally, physically, emotionally? Take us through the different implications of those actions.
So we know that sexual harassment or violence in the world of work has caused stress. You can imagine having to come every day to work to a supervisor or a peer. It doesn't even have to be a supervisor, a peer who is harassing you. That's not a workplace you want to go to every day. Even if it's not just at your workplace, if you have to go through, think about the women who work in the markets. Each day that you are working, your butt is being slapped by every man in the market. I mean that it causes a lot of discomfort. You have to think about how you dress on a daily. When I'm thinking of going downtown to Owino, I'm thinking, okay, how do I dress? What is going to be more protective? Why should we have to go through that? So it causes stress, it causes trauma. It keeps women out of the workplace, because if you go to a workplace and your boss or peers are harassing you, obviously opt out. So women are then denied access to opportunities because of violence and harassment in the workplace.
And maybe briefly also, do you think the legal landscape in Uganda has made it easy for women to report cases of sexual harassment?
So our legal and policy framework remains problematic. At the beginning of this year, is it this year? Yes, at the beginning of this year, we had many young women coming out to speak about harassment. In spaces like this, in the media, there was a case, I remember, for New Vision or Next Media. I mean, the person who is victimized is the person who reports. So you're put on the spot. There are cases that have been reported to police, and it turns into you're slapped actually with cyberbullying because the women came out to speak on social media. So the case is turned onto the victims and not necessarily the perpetrator. We've seen people who report being taken to prison, being arrested, being slapped with cases. So the legal and policy environment remains quite problematic. And therefore, one of the things we are calling for is that victims of sexual harassment and violence have access more to support services, legal services, psychosocial support, other support services, shelters, etc.
etc. And this is briefly, as we conclude this conversation on the 16 days of activism, what does this theme, Orange, the World Fund, Respond, Prevent and Collect, mean for us as a country here in Uganda?
One is why cases as well are not adequately pursued by the police or prosecuted by the police is they don't have funds. They have no money to go and follow up the cases. There are also no support services. The reason why victims of violence remain in the domestic sphere is because, I mean, they have no economic means. If I have nowhere else to go, I'm going to stay in that situation. So we would want to see more money going to, say, shelters where women can say, let me get off work, let me get off from the perpetrator and go into a shelter and be there until I recover from this situation. So we'd want to see more resources going to funding support services. Of course, we want to see more resources going to awareness creation. A lot of people are not aware of the pervasiveness of gender-based violence. So creating awareness is key.
All right. Thank you so much, Eunice Musime from Akina Mama wa Africa, for joining us this morning and getting us to understand what the 16 days of activism is all about. You heard it from her, and I think this conversation is going to go on for the next 14 days, is it? So we'll be able to dive into the different forms and how best women can deal with the sexual violence cases in Uganda. Well, we are coming to the end of morning at NTV, and would like to thank you. This Take Note segment has been sponsored by ITEL, and we thank you so much for joining